Joseph in Egypt, from slave to prime minister of a kingdom. Joseph was just 17 when his dreams began stirring the heavens and shaking the jealousy of his own blood. He was the favorite son of Jacob, born to Rachel, the one woman his father had truly loved. While his brothers worked in the fields, Joseph walked in robes of many colors, silk dyed in bright hues, woven by hands that had never known calluses. That robe wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol. And in the eyes of his brothers, it was an offense. But worse than the robe were the dreams. One morning, Joseph shared his vision, bundles of wheat standing in a field, his sheaf rising upright, while his brothers' sheaves circled and bowed. They laughed bitterly, but he wasn't done. The next dream was even grander. This time, the sun, moon, and 11 stars all bowed to him. He told them without shame, like a boy unaware of the flames he was feeding. Even Jacob, his father, cautioned him. But deep down, everyone could feel it. Joseph believed those dreams, and some dark part of his brothers feared them too. So they did what frightened men do. They planned to erase the threat. It happened when Jacob sent Joseph to check on his brothers in the fields near Shechem. They saw him coming in the distance, that robe like a banner, and the hatred boiled over. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them said. The others nodded. At first, they wanted to kill him, but Reuben, the eldest, spoke up, suggested a pit instead, a dry well, deep enough to bury a boy's screams. They grabbed Joseph, stripped his robe, and hurled him into darkness. He cried out, but no one listened. They sat down and ate, unmoved. And then they saw the caravan, Ishmaelite traders bound for Egypt. One brother, Judah, proposed a new plan: sell him, profit from betrayal. So for 20 silver coins, they handed over their brother like livestock. They took his robe, smeared it with goat's blood, and carried it home. A wild animal devoured him, they told Jacob, and their father wept, as if half his soul had died. Meanwhile, Joseph was dragged across the desert, his wrists bound, his feet blistered, toward a land of strange gods, golden temples, and tongues he could not understand. The boy who once dreamed of stars was now a slave. But though his body was shackled, something deeper inside him remained unbroken. He had lost his robe, his home, and his name, but he had not lost his purpose. And in Egypt, that unshakable dream would begin to rise again. Joseph arrived in Egypt not as a visitor, not as a scholar or merchant, but as property, stripped of freedom, name, and past. He was sold to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, a man of wealth and power who dealt in precision and discipline. To Potiphar, Joseph was another transaction. But quickly, something strange happened in the household. Everything Joseph touched began to prosper. From the storerooms to the vineyards, from the grain supplies to the servants' quarters, order followed him like a shadow. He carried himself not as a slave, but as someone born to lead. Potiphar noticed and placed everything he owned under Joseph's control. A Hebrew boy, now the steward of an Egyptian estate. And Joseph never complained. He never rebelled. He simply worked, quietly, diligently, as if preparing for something only he could see. But as Joseph's influence grew, so did something else: the eyes of Potiphar's wife. She watched him in silence, day after day, her admiration shifting into obsession. Joseph was handsome, confident, and always in control. Everything she was not. One day, she approached him directly. "Lie with me," she whispered. He refused. Again and again, she cornered him. And again, he denied her, not out of fear, but conviction. "How could I do such a wicked thing," he said, "and sin against God?" But her desire was never about love. It was about power. What she could not have, she chose to destroy. One afternoon, when no other servants were present, she seized his cloak and tried to pull him into her bed. He tore away and fled, leaving the cloak behind. And with that garment in hand, she screamed. When Potiphar returned, she held out the cloak as proof and accused Joseph of betrayal. Potiphar burned with rage. Whether he believed her or not didn't matter. His pride had been publicly challenged. And so Joseph was taken, torn from privilege and cast into prison, another fall into darkness. This time, it was not a pit in the desert, it was a dungeon beneath a palace. But Joseph did not break. Even there, in the belly of Pharaoh's prison, he rose. The warden noticed his wisdom, his quiet strength. Soon Joseph was trusted to manage the prisoners themselves. Among them came two new faces, Pharaoh's own cupbearer and baker, both disgraced, both shaken. One night, both men had troubling dreams, visions that stole their sleep and haunted their silence. Joseph listened and interpreted. To the cupbearer, he promised restoration within 3 days. To the baker, death. And both predictions came true. As the cupbearer was released, Joseph spoke just one request. Remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh. But freedom has a short memory, and the cupbearer forgot. So Joseph remained in the prison, year after year, a man who had once dreamed of stars, now surrounded by stone and chains. Yet he waited, not with despair, but discipline, because somewhere he believed the dream still lived. Even in the dark, Joseph held fast, not to what had been taken from him, but to what had been promised long ago. It was in the silence of Joseph's forgotten years that the doors of destiny began to creak open. In the palace above him, Pharaoh, lord of Egypt, God to his people, ruler of the Nile, was tormented by dreams. Night after night, the same visions returned. 7 fat cows grazing peacefully along the riverbank, followed by 7 thin, sickly cows that devoured them. Then another dream, 7 full heads of grain, golden and ripe, swallowed by 7 withered, wind-blasted stalks. The dreams disturbed Pharaoh. They felt like prophecy, like something reaching beyond the veil of sleep to warn him. He summoned priests, magicians, and scholars. None could explain. Not one could offer meaning. And then, as if struck by lightning, the cupbearer remembered the boy from the prison, the Hebrew who interpreted dreams with terrifying precision. 2 years too late, but still in time, he told Pharaoh. And in that moment, everything changed. Joseph was pulled from the shadows, shackled, bearded, silent. He was cleaned, shaved, and dressed in fine linen, and in the span of hours, he stood face to face with the most powerful man in the known world. Pharaoh looked down. "I have heard you can interpret dreams," he said. Joseph did not flinch. "I cannot," he answered, "but God will give Pharaoh an answer." Pharaoh recounted the dreams in detail, and Joseph, with calm authority, spoke truth. The dreams are one and the same. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance will come across all Egypt. After them, 7 years of famine so severe that the good years will be forgotten. Let Pharaoh appoint a wise and discerning man to store grain in the years of plenty, so Egypt may survive the years of lack. The room went silent. And then Pharaoh did what no one expected. He turned to his officials and said, "Can we find anyone like this man, in whom is the Spirit of God?" In one breath, Joseph went from prisoner to prime minister. Pharaoh placed his signet ring on Joseph's hand, clothed him in royal robes, adorned him with a gold chain, and declared him second only to the throne. He gave him a new name, Zaphanath-Paneah, revealer of secrets, and a wife from the house of priests. And just like that, the boy who once stood at the bottom of a pit now stood at the top of an empire. But Joseph did not let power dull him. He worked. He traveled across the land, building storehouses, organizing harvests, collecting grain. And for 7 years, Egypt prospered. Cities were filled. Granaries overflowed. And Joseph, now 30 years old, became the steward of survival. When the famine struck, it was like a curtain of death falling across the world. The soil turned to dust. Crops failed. Hunger swept across nations. But Egypt stood strong because Joseph had prepared. And then, one day, among the long line of foreigners who came to beg for grain, 10 men arrived, bearded, sunburned, cloaked in dust. They bowed low before Egypt's governor, and Joseph recognized them immediately, his brothers, the same men who sold him, who cast him out, who watched him fall. But they did not recognize him. He was older now, stronger, clothed in power, speaking Egyptian through interpreters, and Joseph, holding back tears, did not reveal himself. Not yet. He tested them, accused them of being spies, demanded they return with their youngest brother, Benjamin, the only other son of Rachel. And when they did return, Joseph wept, quietly, in another room, unseen. Because after all the years, the betrayals, the silence, his family stood before him once more. But Joseph needed more than reunion. He needed to know if they had changed. So he placed a silver cup in Benjamin's sack, accused him of theft, and declared he would keep Benjamin as a slave. And then something happened Joseph never expected. Judah, the brother who once proposed selling him, stepped forward and begged to take Benjamin's place. "Let me stay," he said. "Our father will die if we return without him." In that moment, Joseph broke. All the years, all the pain, all the dreams, it rushed out like a flood. He ordered everyone out of the room. He stood before his brothers and, through sobs, cried out, "I am Joseph." The men froze, ashen, terrified. But Joseph stepped forward and said, "Do not be afraid. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to save many lives." Forgiveness flowed where vengeance could have lived. The dreamer had not only survived, he had become the bridge that healed a broken family. The news spread like fire through Canaan. Joseph was alive, not dead, not torn by wild beasts, not lost to slavery, alive, a ruler, a savior. And when his brothers returned home with carts, grain, and Pharaoh's personal invitation, Jacob, their aging father, refused to believe it. Not because he didn't want to, but because the pain of false hope was heavier than grief. But when he saw the wagons, the provisions, and the tears in his son's eyes, something in him stirred. A light that had gone out began to flicker again. He whispered, "My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so Jacob, now Israel, gathered his entire household, 70 people in all, and began the journey to Egypt. Along the way, he stopped at Beersheba and offered sacrifices. And in the stillness of night, God spoke to him. "Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt. I will make you a great nation there, and I will surely bring you back again." With that promise, the father of a shattered family stepped forward into foreign land, carrying the last of his strength. When they reached Egypt, Joseph rode out in a chariot to meet his father. When he saw the old man descend from the carriage, hunched with time, Joseph ran. And he wept, long, loud, uncontrollably, on his father's neck. After decades of silence, after all the pain, the lies, the years stolen by betrayal, father and son embraced again. Jacob looked at him and said, "Now I can die, since I have seen your face and know you are still alive." But Joseph would not let him die without honor. He introduced his family to Pharaoh. He secured land for them in Goshen, the best pastures of Egypt, so they could flourish. And Pharaoh, moved by Joseph's story and wisdom, welcomed them, not as beggars, but as guests of the crown. The famine raged on, and Joseph continued managing the crisis. He collected money, livestock, and eventually land, centralizing Egypt's economy under Pharaoh's authority. But he did it wisely, fairly, ensuring the people were fed and their survival preserved. And through it all, he kept his family safe. Years passed. Jacob lived 17 more years in Egypt, but when the time came for him to die, he summoned Joseph and made him swear, "Do not bury me in Egypt. Bury me with my fathers." And then he blessed his sons, each one, including Joseph's two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, whom he adopted as his own. With his final breath, Jacob gave them not just words but legacy, tying the future of Israel to the land they had left behind. When Jacob died, Joseph mourned deeply. He ordered a royal burial, and Pharaoh's entire court joined in the funeral procession back to Canaan. For 70 days, Egypt wept for the patriarch of a foreign people. But even after the funeral, fear crept back into the hearts of Joseph's brothers. They whispered, "What if Joseph was only kind because our father was alive?" So they came to him trembling, begging again for mercy. But Joseph, standing tall, said the words that define his story, "Do not be afraid. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." In that sentence was a lifetime of pain, purpose, and power. He did not rewrite the past. He did not pretend the betrayal didn't hurt. But he saw beyond it. He saw the hand of God in every twist, every valley, every fall. And he rose above revenge with the quiet strength of a man who knew who he was. Joseph lived out his days not in bitterness, but in legacy. He became a father, a leader, a protector of nations. Egypt flourished under his hand. Israel grew strong in the land of Goshen. And the boy who had once been thrown into a pit for dreaming now stood as the most trusted man in the greatest empire on earth. When he was old and near death, Joseph gathered his family and said, "God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land, to the land he promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." He made them swear to carry his bones when they left Egypt, and they did centuries later in the Exodus led by Moses. Joseph died at the age of 110, embalmed and placed in a coffin in Egypt, but his story never truly ended, because Joseph was never just a slave or a prisoner or a ruler. He was a bridge, a living symbol that suffering is not the end, that what others mean for harm, God can use for healing, that destiny is not destroyed by betrayal, but forged in it. His life reminds us that the pit is not the grave, the prison is not the end, and the silence of forgotten years is not the same as absence. He was abandoned by his brothers, imprisoned for what he didn't do, and forgotten by the very man he helped. But none of it stopped the dream. Because true purpose doesn't die in the dark. It waits, and it grows stronger. Joseph's greatest strength was not just his ability to interpret dreams, but his refusal to give up on the one planted in him as a boy. When everything was taken from him, his freedom, his family, his dignity, he held on to what could never be stolen: faith, character, and vision. That is what made him rise, not once, but every time. And maybe that's the real message. You don't have to be royalty to change the course of history. You don't need crowns or armies or perfect circumstances. You need endurance. You need patience in the waiting and strength in the suffering. You need a dream and the courage to carry it, even when no one else believes in it. Especially then. Because if Joseph could rise from slavery to sit at the right hand of Pharaoh, then maybe your pit is not your ending either. Maybe your story isn't over. Maybe you were born for more than the pain. Maybe the world hasn't seen your dream come true yet. Hold on. Your time will come, just like his did.